All right, welcome back. This is Bassoonists Talk. I am your host, Dr. Laura Bennett Cameron from the University of Texas at Arlington, and I am here with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Cayla Bellamy from Colorado State University, and we're going to talk about what to do once you can play the notes in your etude. I find that my students get flummoxed about this a lot. They're like, well, I can play the notes, so it's finished. It's not finished. There's always more to do, and we're going to talk about what you should do, when, how, and why. Dr. Bellamy.
Absolutely. Thank you. My first uh, kind of overarching principle for this is when we're learning how to play the notes, playing the notes is more than just, we all know that it's more than just the black ink on the page and pushing the right buttons. But I think it's so important for us to remember that as we're practicing things slowly, ultimately needing to speed them up in many cases, we have to do what we're going to do slowly, or we have to do slowly what we're going to have to do when it's fast. And the main example that I give of that is if you think about articulating something like a single tongue quickly, if we're imagining something that ultimately needs to be like in the hundreds tempo wise and you have to articulate 16th notes in a duple subdivision, uh, but when you're practicing it really slowly, it's very easy for us to want to make them nice and little bouncy and just be perfect little 16th notes. And then when you speed it up, you get to a point where you just can't do that anymore because your tongue doesn't move that fast. And so that's when I rewind, practice slowly what I'm going to have to do when it's fast, which is only have one tongue motion hit just the corner or the bottom blade of the reed. Think legato, however you are managing your quick single tongue. But practicing that slowly might mean that it sounds like it's the wrong style. So that also applies to some particularly fast slurs and things like that. If you're going to have to use a special slur fingering or a trill fingering down the line, go ahead and do it when it's slow, even if it sounds kind of gross slow, because that's what you're going to have to do when it's quickly.
I love it. I love it. So once you kind of get all these things in place, like your articulation styles, and you feel like everything is really consistent, the next thing for us to do is to make sure before we turn the tempo up that we're already including our phrasing. We're already including our interpretive marks. We've already thought about our vibrato. We've already thought about our dynamics, and all of that should be included from your very first read through and your very first lowest tempos. Students tell me all the time, well, I was going to wait to add the dynamics in until later. Oh, no, 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 don't do that. Add the dynamics in now. Why would you make yourself have to learn something else later once you've already got habits established? No, no, no. We always want to learn those good habits right off the bat. Always play it with the vibrato that you think you want to use. Always, always do it with the dynamics. Always get all of the accents, all the staccatos. Don't save those for later. Enjoy them right now, and that way your interpretation and your understanding of the piece as an artistic whole can grow as your tempo marking grows too. It's really, really important to do that. So now that we know that we're playing it full out, as a dancer would say, every single time, including all of our things, to make sure that it becomes a habit here, make sure everything becomes a habit here, and most importantly that it becomes a habit here. Let's talk about how to increase the tempo. The best way to do this is to make sure that you can play a given passage 3 to 5 times cleanly, perfectly, in a row. So for my students, I'll have them play usually a phrase, and sometimes we have to zoom in, slow it down, then speed it back up, the bow tie approach, to make sure that we can play everything at that tempo. And then if they can play it, depending on the difficulty of the passage, if it's really hard, 5 times. If it's not as hard, I usually go with 3. If you can play that 3 to 5 times in a row perfectly, then we turn up the tempo by like 97 clicks. I'm kidding. No. Usually it's 2 to 3 clicks. I think that's the max that any person can really accomplish at one time and really be able to process all of the changes and not feel rushed and have your fingers in your face and your brain not feel panicked. For me, when I'm learning something that is exceptionally difficult, it's 1 click at a time. And I mean, maybe I'm just not that good at the bassoon, but that's the only way I can make through it, is by really keeping that tempo down and giving myself some space to learn and giving myself some space to say, this is really hard and I really shouldn't turn up the tempo faster. So let's say, we're increasing the tempo phrase by phrase by phrase. is really important to mark down what your tempos are somewhere. My brain can't hold all of that information. Dr. Bellamy puts it in this really awesome spreadsheet. I just write it on the page over the given passage, or I use a post-it note. But it's really important to always know what your maximum successful tempo is for any given passage. And then my kind of rule of thumb is if I can play a larger passage or a complete etude, or if my students can, at a given tempo with one or two mistakes, then it's time to turn up the metronome. Caveat. If the mistakes are mistakes that you're making frequently, like you keep on making the same mistake, don't turn up the metronome. If it's like a one-off reading mistake, like, I've never done that before, I feel okay turning up the tempo. Because we're musicians, we're humans, we're not computers, we're not MIDI generators. We're going to make mistakes. And if we are always waiting for the perfect performance or the perfect run through, we're never going to turn up the tempo and we're never going to get there. But once you make that mistake or once you get to the end of that cut, evaluate. Like, okay, was that like a fatal mistake that I really need to stop and correct, or was that a one-off that I feel okay moving on from? Because you need to know the difference in your types of mistakes. So, Dr. Bell, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to jump in because this is surprising no one by this point. If you've been following all of our videos, you knew that I like to make drawings for things. And I have a drawing for what this feels like when we're in drawings, when we're just the right practice zone. So I call it the sweet spot of practicing. And a lot of what Dr. Bennett Cameron is talking about is a really concrete way of describing the same thing that I often talk with students about and use in my own practice, your feeling of confidence. So I'm going to ask you some of these, see if we're going to be using the same words. We haven't talked about this before, but when you are practicing really well and you feel like you're super effective and everything is just like you're learning stuff and you're ready to turn up the tempo and you're super engaged, what does that feel like for you?
For me, I feel really energized. Like turning up the metronome for me is like, yeah, I did it. And also being able to like slash out the metronome marking for me, I'm a writer on the page, like I said, and like scratching out that metronome marking and putting the new one next to it. It's like I did that. That's a good
So you
thing,
feel like,
and it makes me
yeah, like energized,
go ahead.
confident,
Yeah, very confident.
wanting more for sure, and focused,
Yes.
right? Your brain is only thinking
Yeah.
about the things that you're doing in your practice session.
Yes.
That's where we want to be. And I think we're more in control of putting ourselves in that mental state than we think we are. So when you have too much going on, when the tempo is a little bit too fast, or when the passage is a little bit too long, like you've learned the whole run, but you're not ready to play the whole coda of your concerto, or you haven't learned the whole cadenza and you get to the end, it feels different, right? It feels anxious and it feels nerve-wracking and it feels scary. And that's the same kind of feelings that we have that we associate with performance anxiety, because you've added something else to the equation. When you have too much coming in, there's too much tempo, or there are too many notes, or there's too many people watching you, right? It feels anxious, and we can fix that by removing something. So if you add in all your embellishments when we're doing the bass rhythm approach that Dr. Bennett Cameron talked about last time, you added in all those trills, and all of a sudden you're anxious and you're missing all these notes. You can either remove the trills again, or you can slow the tempo down, remove some tempo, and bring yourself back down to that sweet spot. The flip side of it, on the button underneath my little zone, is if you feel bored. And if you feel bored, and not bored because you can't play it, but it's sort of like if someone told you that all you could practice was the second bassoon part to your 6th grade band piece for the rest of time. You feel sort of uninspired and like you don't really know what to add, so you need to add something.
Unmotivated.
Unmotivated. Yeah, in a low energy kind of way. So it's time for something more. So when you have that point where you've done your 3 to 5 repetitions and it's awesome, and you're starting to feel unmotivated because you know you feel like you can already play it, it's time for something more. It might be a more aggressive phrasing, it might be more tempo, it might be time to perform it in public and see what happens when you get nervous. It's time for something more if you're feeling
It's time for something
bored
more.
and unmotivated.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Awesome. So thinking about preparing or performing, that kind of pivots into our very last thing we wanted to talk about. Many of us are in a situation this fall where we're getting ready to record for something. It could be graduate school or college pre-screening recordings. It could be all state etudes for a number of you. You're getting ready to record things. And there are a few things, once you can already play the notes, that we have to practice and be prepared for ahead of time, because playing the notes is not the same when you flip on your recorder and all of a sudden everything feels weird and what comes out of the speakers is not what you swear you played. So there are three different things that I would like to recommend for that. One is to do, these are all with test recordings, right? Do a test recording with your microphone at different distances from you to see what impact that has on your sound and what's going on in the room. I was just working with actually a flute player this morning on getting a microphone placement that worked really well for these Zoom lessons, and we both thought going into it that it was a problem with the microphone, and like 80% of the problem was solved when we just changed how far the microphone was away from her. So playing around with microphone distance makes a huge difference, especially if you're new to this recording stuff. So how close are you to your microphone? It doesn't need to be up your nose. It doesn't need to be a football field away. You know, up and anywhere from, yeah, just like that. Microphone right up your nose. So somewhere like usually it's like 3 to 6 feet, depending on what instrument you're playing. Bassoon, I find there's a pretty nice spot, like maybe 3 to 4 feet away is kind of the prime spot that I find with my microphone. And then testing your camera placement if it's a video audition. I know a number of states right now, for all state regulations, require that there to be a clock in the background so they can make sure you're not cheating the system. I know, right? Isn't that awesome? Awesome and kind of crazy. So test your camera placement, make sure you can see everything you need to see. This is like not the optimum recording. We don't need to see everything around you. I don't need to go stand. I'm not going to get up and run away from you guys. But somewhere where you can see most of your body, most of your instrument, and that might mean that your microphone is different and a different connected than your camera is, if you have the ability to do that. So your microphone might be closer to you than the camera is. And then take a look at what's in the background, right? Not like the cat's litter box, little professional things like that. Your dirty laundry, just clean up the stuff behind you.
I just wanted some dirty laundry in my shot, Dr. Bellamy. Are you sure that's a bad idea?
Every time we record these, I make sure to angle my camera just so you can't see my pile of garbage off in the corner.
I don't believe it exists.
It's just recycling. I'm just doing the responsible thing by waiting for recycling. So check your camera placement. And then the last thing I recommend, actually I think is in many ways the most useful thing that took me a long time to learn, which is just hit record at the beginning of your recording day and don't touch the recorder, just let it run the entire time. And if you need more than one take, then maybe you make a big loud clapping sound, or sometimes when we're recording these videos, we have a colored sheet of paper that we flap around so that we can know where to edit later. But one big long take, and it lowers my anxiety level, at least. I don't feel like it's a thing for me to hit record because I've only hit record once, and then I can remove that from the input for my emotions. It's recording in the background, and I'll just take what I want later.
Yep, that's why when you work, when you make a professional recording, your only job is to play. Your job is not to press record or not to worry about microphones. So you want to make sure that you take all of those stresses away from you. You just need to focus on playing the best you can play.
Yep, so if you're recording those etudes, check your microphone distance ahead of time, check your camera placement ahead of time, like days ahead of time, where you're going to put the camera. And then when it's time for you to record, you've done your warm-up, or maybe you even do your warm-up. You hit record and then you go sit there and do your warm-up, because ultimately you can stick it into your sound editor and just chop off that beginning. And you don't have to worry about now's the time that I'm recording. You just play your etudes and play your scales.
There you go. Let's live in the dream.
Living the dream. So those are our series of tips on what are the things that you can do once you can play the notes, but you're still preparing for something that's a more high stakes live performance or an audition.
Yes, absolutely. Well, guys, this is the conclusion of our series on etudes and etude preparation, and we're so excited that you joined us for all of this. We love you guys so much, and we'll see you on our next series.
See you.